Hey guys, what's up? Roston. Before I dig into it today, there's a couple of things I want to touch on, a couple of things I want to work through very quickly. The first thing is that yesterday I made, I think it was yesterday, it could have been the day before, a video relating to my stance on abortion. And I was quizzed quite a bit on Twitter and privately about my specific sort of position on that. And let me clarify just a couple of points. Just because I was arguing from that one particular perspective doesn't mean that I discount all other arguments for or against. I largely discount theistic arguments because I don't consider them valid. They're self-serving, they're circular in logic, etc. There are many other reasons, legitimate, intelligent reasons, why women choose to terminate pregnancies. And paramount above all else, in my own opinion, is the freedom of a woman's individual body. Again, I don't grant constitutional or civil or social rights to a non-cognitive entity, like certain nation states do, like my own nation state does. I fundamentally disagree with the idea. And as I said, I disavow the argument. I disagree with the argument of potential. As I said, there are many other perfectly legitimate reasons as to why I feel that abortion is satisfactory. I just wanted to address that specifically. So, the second thing I want to do is say, if you guys like what I'm doing here, like, comment, subscribe. I know hitting the like button means that you're effectively adding the video to your like list, and if you're like me and you're a lazy git, you basically use your like list as like a music player, because I consistently watch most of my music on YouTube. It's kind of an inefficient way of getting it done, but you're not pirating anything, you're not stealing anything, but I literally use my like list as an audio player. So I can kind of understand if you don't want to do that, but subscribing never hurts, and neither does adding a comment. Whether or not you agree or disagree with my positions or my opinions, there's a pretty good chance I'll actually respond to you. Not only that, but I'm pretty open to any sort of Skype conversations or debates, Google Hangouts with people who want to discuss the same sort of subjects that I'm interested in. Very interested in that. So if you direct message me, you can get a hold of me, and I'm pretty open to any sort of conversation. That's why I'm here. I'm here to talk to people and have a two-way conversation. I don't just like talking into a camera. And the final thing is I'm going to do a little bit of shilling. I'm not proud of it. I'm never really wild about the idea of shilling. But if you check the comments, the links below, there'll be a little link. I'm kind of looking to gather up a few quid for some better audio equipment. I have the software, and I have the camera, and I have everything else for composing this content. But the microphone that I'm actually using right now is borrowed. It's a studio quality microphone from an associate of mine who does similar work. But I'd like to try and get my own. I'm willing to bridge a gap on it, but there's a GoFundMe in the comments, so in the video description. So if you want to help out with that, go nuts. If you don't, that's fine too. So that's all for now. On this subject, I have an actual thing to discuss today. So moving on. There's a rise, finally, in more mainstream sort of circles. The term that's bubbling up, there's a term that's bubbling up from the wonderful sort of stew of garbage that is conversations of the sort of nature that I tend to have and that many people have on YouTube, on forums, etc. And the rise of the term and the rise of this wonderful word called regressive leftists. This is my favorite new term, because it is the crystallized essence of everything that for the last 2 years, people in Gamergate have actually been fighting against. Gamergate's pretty interesting in the sense that there's an ongoing conversation in Gamergate about whether or not Gamergate should specifically be about ethics in video games journalism, or should it sort of be about a little bit more? Because fundamentally, the issue with Gamergate has expanded greater to a wider place than ethics in games journalism. It's become about censorship. It's become about tackling moral authoritarianism. It's about endorsing sort of cultural libertarianism. And that's really interesting. So I would weigh more heavily on the sort of extended definition of the sort of things that Gamergate is tackling right now. I think it's not Gamergate's responsibility to tackle these things, but they do occur. These conversations do happen within Gamergate, and it's interesting that they're happening there. It's funny because Gamergate is being used as a train station for on the railway lines of ideas right now. You're having it won't go away. Like, it keeps popping up in places like recently on the Rubin Report with Milo Yiannopoulos, and Joe Rogan's talking about it, and every now and then, like, The Amazing Atheist touches on it. Sargon of Akkad is pretty much, and Sargon of Akkad, Mundane Matt, Harmful Opinions, all those guys are discussing subjects greater than simply ethics in games journalism. And the mainstream media, I say mainstream, but mainstream sort of scholars and people whose are household names for relative intellectuals, people like Bill Maher, Richard Dawkins, the whole gang are sort of starting to now recognize this sort of term, this regressive leftist term. Basically, regressive leftist is ironically a politically correct way of saying social justice warrior. Social justice warrior was never going to cut it in mainstream conversational circles because it gives a negative association to something that is not necessarily negative. The concept of social justice and social equalization is in and of itself not bad. It's when you add warrior at the end that it becomes an issue, and you start talking about the sort of people who are social justice warriors. And that was never going to cut it. That was never going to fly, because the first two words in the whole thing were a positive thing, whereas once you completed the sentence to the third word, it became negative. So it was kind of always going to be a shitty word, and it was never going to take off in a mainstream way. But the word that we have now is regressive leftists. And basically, if you want to have a good idea of what a regressive leftist is, you really sort of need to boil them down, in my opinion, to social authoritarians, cultural authoritarians, whilst also, not cultural authoritarians, sorry, social authoritarians, but cultural relativists. And their relativism is actually so strong it's kind of dangerous, where it forgives people profound ethical trespasses for the sake of making sure that they do not offend. Really great examples of cultural relativists are people like Nasid Mayar, I think his name is. I probably ruined his name. But I think he's British born and he lives in the States. And he's an atheist who spends absolutely all of his time apologizing for Islam. All of his time. Any criticism of Islam, any criticism of Islam's doctrines, Islam's ideology, is effectively Islamophobia. Now, there are lots and lots of actual people, moderate Muslims, who understand that criticizing an idea is criticizing an idea. Interestingly, some of Islam's greatest critics are Muslims. It's this wonderful faith in the sense that it's always involved in an ongoing internal dialogue about its perception of itself, about the ideas that it espouses. And it's really, Islam has always had a very solid tradition of sort of arguing, I want to say arguing, but debating with itself about its own nature. And I think, to great, of course, Judaism and Christianity also do that as well. But it's a redeemable aspect of Islam. But to criticize some aspects of a cultural practice or a religious practice, etc., and then branding that criticism from an objective or reasonable standpoint, calling that things like racism and discrimination is extremely dangerous. And this is the sort of place that people like regressive leftists go to. The definition of the word obviously is ever expanding, and it's complicated right now, and it's still not a thing. But basically, these are authoritarians. Authoritarians to their own, but allow liberty and relativism to the other. It's a very strange place to be in. It's a paradoxical place to be in intellectually. To simultaneously attack your own, and to grant your own no privilege of freedom, no privilege of expression, whilst simultaneously defending the privilege of freedom and the privilege of expression of others who are other, who you have deemed to be on a lower social standing than your own. Fundamentally, most sort of cultural left and right-leaning libertarian-minded people really want a freedom of conversation and a freedom of criticism of ideas at all times. They want that to be able to happen regardless of who you're criticizing, who you're talking about, what subject you're talking about. Because in order for social progress to be made, we have to make sure that we have the ability to really sort of talk about these subjects in an open and complicated capacity. Silencing and censoring that conversation is extremely dangerous. It causes social regression, and it damages us all as a whole. I've gone on before about, freedom of speech, etc., and I don't want to circle back on that subject too much, but effectively, I'm glad that this term has come up, this word cultural regressive, because it really sort of helps to get us to a place where mainstream intellectuals and mainstream writers and liberals will consider discussing this increasing rise of dangerous social authoritarianism in the left. Dave Rubin of the Rubin Report put it quite succinctly when he said that regressive leftists are the left's Tea Party. And if we don't pay attention to them now and nip it in the bud, we could end up just as fucked as America's far right. I'm Ross Dunn. Thanks for listening. Like, comment, and subscribe.